Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You're with me, Chris Reddington, and here we talk about all things cloud. Now, thank you for joining. It has been a little while since we've released another of these episodes with a guest. There's been quite a few things going on in life personally, and as you may notice, there's a little bit of a speech thing going on with me today. I had my wisdom tooth removed last week, so many reasons not to be streaming, but we're back. And we're really back, actually. We've got a really interesting session here today. We're really going to be changing the angle with the show coming up, focusing a lot more on development topics. And what better way to focus on that than focusing really about the thing that we write, code. And I don't know about you, but when you think about code, typically I'm thinking about the best way I can write this code. I'm thinking about, are there certain patterns I could have used or certain elements in the language that maybe I should or shouldn't have used. But does any of that really matter? Well, I'm pleased to be joined today by our guest, Daniel Scheufler. Hey, Daniel.
Hello, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you, Daniel. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Been looking forward to this all week.
Excellent. No, glad to have you. And really interesting topic, just as I alluded in the intro there, because a lot of people, like myself included, think about getting all those nice patterns, getting the most fanciest way you can write your code. But the topic of your session here is code is red.
Yeah, that came out of, junior developer, right? One of the things we do is we'll go do this as a hobby. We'll take some time to go pick up a new language. And for me, it was on vacation. I was sitting down trying to relax next to a swimming pool or a beach. I don't remember exactly. When out of the blue, it beamed me in the head after I was reading up on documentation for a new language I was trying to program in, that what I was trying to write had to be read by myself and others constantly. And that if I failed to write it in a way that I could read it later, because you know how it is. You start a project, you come back a week later, what the heck was this? And especially when it's a new language, the syntax is all different. Hello? If you don't know what you're doing, you can't keep going.
Right.
And it changed the way I looked at even the code I was working with on a professional level.
Yeah, spot on. And as soon as I saw your title, Code is Red, my immediate thought was those times where I've gone back, read some of my code, and I'm thinking, what on earth was I trying to do here? Like, what was I writing? Like,
yeah.
What is this? But before we jump into any of that, before we run away, because I'm sure we can run away into this topic.
Totally.
Let's introduce yourself, Daniel. Who are you and what's your background?
Right. So my name is Daniel Scheufler. I am a programmer in Houston, Texas. I am currently working with a company known as Improving, and I've been practicing since 2014-ish.
Nice.
High-level summary. Christian husband, father, most recently the improver, and I have been practicing development for, almost a decade now that I think about it. It's kind of awesome.
Nice.
But it has been a subject of great interest for me, basically since I discovered it in about college. I started by trying to write mods for a game called Minecraft, if anyone remembers that. And it really was that first moment where I said, I want to do this. It was not I have to do this for a school project. It was, can I figure it out? And ever since I got there, I've been hooked on finding these little ways to do it, to the point where I was originally planning to try and take a career in robotics. Of course, by the time I graduated, all the robotics jobs had dried up in Houston. So into oil and gas I went. And since then, I've been intentionally cultivating my career on a specific set of skills or areas where I believe I want to grow into practice, with the intent of growing in my ability to lead teams, in the ability to architect and design effective solutions. And as part of that, my perspective has constantly shifted. Like almost every year, there's been an incremental shift from here's what is good for development, because that's where you started. You want to make certain your home is in order, and shifting gradually towards how do we do this effectively as a business? Because in the end of the day, they're paying us for a reason, and it's not because of what's comfortable for us.
And already there's so many avenues that I want to go and explore from what we talked about there. This is always a challenge I have when I'm kind of, hosting, and you get so many different interesting insights. There's so many ways we can go. But the first one you mentioned there was about getting your house in order and kind of what they're paying us for, right? And it's interesting because something that you said in there was about you've been practicing for 10 years, and I'm not sure that, definitely myself anyway, I don't often think about it as a practice. It's just something I do, but
Mhm.
actually saying it as a practice is a really great way of thinking about it, because it is something that we're kind of working towards continuously improving, as you mentioned there,
Right?
thinking about those elements that you're continuously evolving the way that you think about them. And the fact that it needs to be read, coming back to your title, first off, is point number one, because let's say I'm new to the organization, I'm new to project, I'm new to the team, whatever scenario. How do I get productive really quickly? I first need to understand what on earth is going on.
Exactly. You start by reading that code.
Mhm.
And one of the things, if you spend some time to think about it, it's one of those paradigm shifts. If you let it bubble in your brain for even 5, 10 minutes, you'll realize how radically this has to shift your practice.
Mm.
Actually, if you're willing, I'd like to borrow one of my slides here for that,
Yeah, let's
as
bring
it
that
it
up.
allows me to explain it pretty nice. Let me jump to. Hold on. There. Wait, no. It'll get there eventually. There it is. Right. So if you think about, all right, slides aren't wanting to play nice today. If you think about the root activity of what we're supposed to be doing every day when we're developing code, fundamentally, it comes down to one action: changing code,
Mm,
right? I need to modify it. I need to go fix a bug, right? Okay, well, you got to change the code because there's a bug in there.
mm,
Or I need to refactor this because it's just a mess and we're not going to be able to maintain it. Got to
mm,
change the code. Oh, well, you know what? I really need to add this feature. Okay, go add a new endpoint. By the way, changing the controller. All of these hinge on that same activity. But how are you going to change the code if you can't understand it?
right,
Right? The reason we
right.
don't throw a junior at a brand new feature is because they don't understand enough of the paradigm to be able to do it on their own. So we coach them and we walk them through it. And they'll have a senior developer who's reading the code for them and translating as they go through. In short, the prerequisite for being able to do the most common activity in development is to understand the code. Well, what undergirds understanding? Reading.
Mm,
Not only do you have to be able to understand the syntactic sugar of whatever language is your preference. I mean, for example, have you ever tried to read the link written like it's SQL? That stuff is complex.
mhm.
But if you develop enough of a feel for the language, you can start parsing it. You can start grokking what the intent was. But it's so much easier just to read as this chained function calls, right?
Mm. And this is the interesting thing. Like, I remember back as a teenager, I got involved. Similar story, actually. Got involved into game development, but it was web development for me
Hmm.
rather than Minecraft. And there was this particular sci-fi game I was working on,
Hmm.
and I got involved with a team that were helping build it. And it was around the time where web services were really starting to boom. I think we had things like WCF coming along and all these other weird and wonderful things at the time. And
Yeah.
my job at the time was, right, we want to build some web services to go and do blah. It's like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. Getting my head around web services, getting my head around what's going on programmatically. I take a look in this code base and I'm just like, whoa, I've got no idea what on earth is going on here. Like, in the depths of it, like at a surface level, I can understand what I need to do to get the job done. But in terms of how everything is hanging together as we really build out those web services,
Mhm.
that was not a solo gig. So as you say, worked with others in the team to get there. But wow, that was an interesting gut feeling and gut reaction, let's say.
So on that, can I kind of pull out and highlight something in that experience there?
Mm,
I'll
please.
bet you that while you were trying to read through these services and try and figure out how are these pieces tied together, the struggle was trying to figure out, metaphorically, how this box connected to this box
Hmm.
conceptually. Why
Yep.
does this exist? What am I supposed to do with it?
Yep.
We call this, generally speaking, like object-oriented programming, right? Because we're supposed to interact with a set of behaviors and data that's collected there.
Mm,
But if the responsibility of that portion of the model isn't well defined, good luck figuring out the magic words to interact with it.
right.
And that's one of the most fundamental challenges we have in development. If you think about what separates a individual contributor, a solid individual contributor, from one of the ones we would call a senior, we usually think it's years of experience. but you could have year 1 10 times and be less effective than the guy who's gone through 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of comes down to, how are you making use of that? That je ne sais quoi that the senior developer has, that the junior's trying desperately to develop, is a facility with the code to describe accurately a model of the world.
Mm.
Right? So think about why we write software real quick, and I'm going to try the slides again.
Sure.
But when we're writing software, there is some kind of a business feature or behavior we want to support. You see, right? So are we writing code for the computer? No. The computer is going to extrapolate all of the blah in your stuff. It's going to transpile it and try and condense it as smart as it can, because let's be honest, those compilers know how to memory optimize way better than we do nowadays.
Right.
Like there used to be a guy who knew how to do that. We're not him.
Yep.
So the computer never really sees our long variable name or whatever method called. It just knows jump to this location in the program.
Yep.
Cool. So we're not writing for the computer anymore. At least we really shouldn't, because that's a bad habit.
I was going to say, and if we are, we're probably writing for Skynet, and that's another problem which we don't want to talk about here. So,
yeah, I think there's some scary philosophical questions that come up with that.
Right.
So then maybe we're writing it for the business. And here's a double-edged sword. Does the business really want your code? Right. You get it. The business doesn't care. They just want the behavior. If they could get that with a zero-code solution, they probably would. The problem is the last zero-code solution they had was a poor accountant who would have to spend the next 1,000 years to keep up with the record keeping.
Yep.
Which is why they want a computer to do it. So the computer isn't the target audience. The business kind of isn't the target audience. They just bear with it as a necessary evil, which is why they think of us as a cost center.
True. Very true.
So we're writing it for other developers. And that has to include, as we've already discussed, that future version of ourselves where we've forgotten half of this. And therein lies the scariest bits. What are we trying to write in our code? Is it merely a description of the behavior? No, that's easy to get back out of the code. Blah, blah, blah equals something or else. Okay, I know that's an assignment. I can even understand if blah, that's an evaluation. But why did I do it? Why am I talking to this object to get this information? What's special about that blah variable that I had to do an if branch on it? If we're not capturing that in our code, we're definitely going to screw future ourselves up, because they're not going to remember. They can't. They'll have gone through at least 60 other features by then and have dumped that context long ago.
There's always this wishful thinking, isn't there? That, I'll remember that in the future. Oh, that'll be okay. I know what I'm doing here.
And every once in a while, you'll run into one of those guys with eidetic memory or something, and they will remember, which is insane. Good on them. Wish every team had one of those guys. But I'm so
definitely not that person. 100%.
Right? But fundamentally, the code is written for other developers. It is written to describe not merely a what, but a degree of the why. Specifically capturing the why from the business, our patrons, more or less.
And this is no different, really. Like, if we extrapolate away from programming, like thinking to like even some of the TED Talks that you see about, like, great presentations always start with why. It's that kind of logic, right? Is why are we doing it in this way? Why are we doing it in this particular purpose? Because without that why, what's the point in even reading through that? You don't understand necessarily what it's trying to do or how, or that's the basis for everything there, your foundation.
Exactly. And there are so many principles that we've learned through the practice of development that kind of keep tipping us back towards that. If you think about, for example, I think it's called the solid principles, right? Single responsibility, open close principle. All of these are there to guide us in a particular aspect, kind of a meta aspect of programming. It's no longer just the how fast can you type words on a keyboard. It's now, can you type the right words? Can you collect them in the right shapes? Because all of those principles are about how you design the pieces of your program to interact. And that design fundamentally alters how you're going to be able to read it. So let me see if I don't know if I have a good example in this presentation, so I'll try and paint you a picture. If you had
Sure.
the choice between what is effectively a fluent interface like link,
Mm.
select some projection dot
Mhm.
where x dot is true, would you prefer to read that, or would you prefer to read, select this, comma, this, comma, this, comma, this from this and this, join, blah, where x dot blah? Like, there
Yep.
is a degree of more difficulty by throwing more information at you that is easier to describe when I can approach a terse human syntax.
It's abstracted. It's abstracted
Exactly.
to be close to us. Like you said in the beginning, the computer doesn't care about all of those keywords in that language. It's not
Yeah, I
aligned
can
for
just
them.
find them.
Mm.
Now, the real trick is if the model makes sense. If you understood what a select means, then you'll understand that better. If you only understood SQL, you could probably guess at what the link fluent interface means. But you have to understand what the model is trying to communicate, as well as the base language features in order to get there. Now, take that a step further, and let's just pretend we're going to write a fluent interface for our own content.
Mm.
How do we go about interacting with that? Let's take one of the classic pairs of design patterns. And you're familiar with the Gang of Four design patterns. Those
Certainly am.
guys, super smart, but they're doing a job trying to describe a common scenario and a common solution pattern, right? That's the entire reason they exist. But if you take the factory and the strategy, those two almost always get paired up when you're trying to go with some variable strategy for some context, like taxes. Now, if I was saying, give me a strategy for taxes, I could either call it, give me the taxing strategy, but that's not super descriptive. Or I could say, give me the country's tax law. There are different ways to describe that, but what am I choosing to describe? Am I choosing to describe the program, strategy, factory, blah? Sometimes there's an appropriate space for that. Or am I trying to describe the problem space, the
Right.
country's tax code?
And this is the challenge, isn't it? Is potentially you're solving for multiple challenges at the same time, which is where you need to be thinking in terms of those different personas who are going to be reading the code. Is it future you? Is it the junior who's coming onto the project? Is it
Mm-hmm.
someone who's been recruited brand new into the company? And I think this is something that, again, I certainly do, but I think a lot of us find challenging, is how you document in such a way that it is almost self-fulfilling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the kind of
Yeah.
concept of a self-documenting code, right?
Mm.
And for that, I've found a couple of things that help for that, but it always comes down to some variation on domain-driven design.
Mm-hmm.
Like we found this as a popular phrase, but for those who are unfamiliar, domain-driven design, high-level synopsis is, hey, we have a domain, a problem space that I was referring to that we're trying to solve for the business. And within that domain, certain words mean certain things. An account in, authentication means one
Mm-hmm.
thing. An account in accounting means another.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're working in accounting area, you really should be using their version of the account. And so if you are able to push your software to talk about itself, that is to name the classes or the methods in the means that represents the domain, it becomes easier to transfer the knowledge, provided you can educate people in the domain. And so building up on that, one of those necessary steps to build and make for like easy to understand code is you want to go for not merely descriptive code, because it's really easy to do that, right? If I just said, I'm going to declare a variable and it's going to say that the invoice.billing total is greater than 1,000, and on the other side of the equal sign, you're going to see invoice.billing total greater than 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I added no new information there. I just repeated myself. By the way, we have
So what?
yeah, we have that whole dry, don't repeat yourself there for a reason. It applies to information, decisions, all manner of things. Strongly recommend check out Pragmatic Programmer. Great book. They do a much better job describing that aspect of dry than I do. But in that, dry is trying to push us away from simply repeating what is already going to be written there. Anyone who can read basically any programming language can understand what the evaluation of that Boolean is going to be. But if I take a moment and I rephrase that variable from invoice billing, greater than 1,000, I can do one of two kinds of names. What's that 1,000 represent conceptually? Oh, well, that's our credit limit. We don't want to extend any credit beyond $1,000 per new account. Oh, okay. So invoice billing total greater than credit limit. Okay. That's one way. And that's slightly more informative because now I'm adding meaning to that evaluation. Why did I do that? Well, I wanted to see if the invoice billing total was over the credit limit. But why did I care? Why did I compute that?
Exactly. And this is what takes it from being that rogue value, that magic number that means nothing, into something contextual, into your program. Because I think, like you mentioned there, the comment of, okay, we're going to set invoice amounts to 1,000. Okay, put that in the comment, but I can see that from that line as well.
Right.
I know nothing new as a result of this comment.
And so
the worst part as well, just to jump in, is if the functionality changes and you haven't updated the comment.
Yep, immediately it's out of date, and this is why comments have been kind of frowned upon because they immediately become cancerous the moment your code shifts. Because they're not the code itself. Whereas the code itself has to, most of the time, change at the same time. So what I would recommend is instead of just aiming at the description of why or what that value means, I would push towards the intent. Why did you compute it? What are you going to, what's the change you're going to do? So if this were example saying, when the credit limit is exceeded, my functionality is I need to show an alert or flag that invoice. Okay. Should flag invoice for credit limit exception. That's way more descriptive as a variable name. And then when I read the if statement that's going to call for that, I don't have to remember what the computation on the other side is. Because implicitly, it's whether or not I should take the next action. And so it has a lot of benefits in that way.
You could even go to a level further, I guess, which is having a method which calculates that. And then it's the method which is explicitly named to go and do that rather than the variable and having the logic there as well. So
exactly. And the goal there is what's the best way for you to capture the intent for the code, right? Every bit of code, going back to who we're writing it for, was written because someone requested that feature. At least I hope so. Some of it is necessary to make it so that our orchestration works, like the startup functionality you'll find in a lot of web APIs, right? That's for us to stand up a controller. And so the consumer of that code really is just straight up a developer. But the moment you get under that API, one step separated from that, now you really need to start talking business language because that's what's driving that API being written.
Which puts us into a really interesting place there, because I guess typically, and this is where DevOps comes in, I suppose, is, you have developers, you have ops, but the business aren't even in the discussion at that point. You're just in IT terms at that point. So that's for some organizations, potentially quite a shift to be thinking about.
It can be. And on that shift, one of the things I will encourage anyone in the audience is don't be kind of intimidated by that. Just because that's the way your organization works today doesn't mean that's how it's always going to work, or even how it always did work. There was a time before the computers took over everything, and then they became a necessary fact of life. There was a time before it was important for the developers to bear in mind the ops consideration of their code. But the times keep changing. One of the things we know in our industry is we keep needing to keep up with new technology trends or new features in the language, or, oh gosh, our dependencies went out of date and now we're at a security risk. This is normal for us. It's less normal for business. So one of the best ways we can help serve them is show them it's not that scary by adopting small changes that allow us to communicate more easily with them, by taking care of certain things they didn't even know they needed to think about, right? Like, they may think, oh, well, I want to do this. Okay, well, we're going to need some place to host it. We've picked a good, cheap option for you so you can control your costs, thinking for them, while then handing them the lever to make the choice. Same concept with the code. It doesn't have to be hidden from the business. We just tend to do that because the business doesn't usually speak code. But if you're familiar with, say, Cucumber or the Gherkin language syntax, there's no reason that your test content couldn't be read or shared with them. Heck, I've constantly am kind of pushing teams towards use this as a communication mechanism to capture what your intent is for the acceptance criteria of an agile ticket. Like, hey, it should do this. Okay, in what circumstances? Under what action? Use this as a template to help you discuss with the business what's important to them, and then capture that directly as your tests. Because now I can basically go about building trust saying, hey, you said I need to do these things. Here's the code that tests that I do those things. Now, are they going to understand what's actually happening in that when method? Probably not. But if they trust you to implement the when to match what they're saying, then they can see, hey, we've got these tests, and maybe they'll think of something they need, or they'll start calming down. It's like, hey, what else do we need to cover there? You become the partner rather than simply the servant.
And I was just about to say, what I like is it brings them onto that journey as well, because inevitably, as business needs evolve, as they do, things change, businesses change. That's why we're all still in jobs. Is we get these new requests coming in. Imagine a world where, and I'm not saying necessarily people go this far, but imagine a world where you have those more technical folk in the business who can say, right, I'm going to stub out this new when in your cucumber tests there. Yes. You go and do the work in terms of actually filling out what we need to achieve that. But this is now a new requirement that we have. Like, how awesome is that?
Yeah, that would be phenomenal. And you can build that kind of a partnership with the business. One of the things, human nature always wants to run a little faster than we can actually go with that. So you'll have to bear in mind, it's going to take them a while to get used to that idea. It's going to take them a long while to build up the chops, the skill set to get to be able to do that. And it'll seem really slow to us because we live and breathe technology. What do you mean it took you 4 months to get used to saying that in a syntax? It'll take us about a month if we go at it. But that's not their world. And one of those, it's kind of a humbling experience when you realize, oh, my skill set doesn't hold the same value in their world. The reason my skill set's useful is because their world generated the opportunity for it. If you can kind of do that mental flip, it puts you in a much better position to be able to pull out the information we desperately need to do the job of writing communicative code.
There's a phrase I always love to use where I can seek to understand, and it really feels like it fits in that scenario.
Yes,
because
exactly.
You're not necessarily going to have the answer to the problem until you really truly understand that business domain, which again comes back to domain-driven design now.
Yep. And all it takes is just one developer on a team, patient and willing enough to go spend an hour sitting right next to their PO and watching what they're doing. Or sitting with one of their customers and asking questions like a curious kid. Hey, Dad, what's that? It is worth its weight in gold. And honestly, is one of the tasks I tend to assign to my junior developers because it's a super easy way for them to contribute. Because now, where they couldn't spend a lot of valuable time solving a hard technical problem, they have gone and done strong, solid, good work to kind of sniff out, well, hey, they're having a pain point with this workflow. Really? We just implemented that last month. Why didn't they tell us? They didn't know how. They didn't know it was a pain point until I asked them, well, wouldn't it be easier if? But creating those partnerships takes a little bit of creativity, as it were.
So I guess then kind of taking stock on where we've gone with the conversation here, because we started off with code being read, that kind of idea of whether it's future us, whether it's someone brand new to the project, brand new to the organization, taking them on that journey of not just understanding at the surface level what the code is doing, like from a purely functional or schematic perspective, but taking them into that kind of business level of why is it doing what it's doing? Like, how did we actually arrive to this conclusion, working with our partners, not just in technology, but also in the business as well? So if we assume that people are kind of with us on that journey, they're listening now and thinking, yeah, this is awesome. Love this. Need to get my banner out to say code should be read and bring everyone along with me. What would be those things then that people should start, making it, what's the words I'm looking for? Evolution rather than revolution, let's say. How do they start bringing others onto that journey, do you think?
All right. So that's an excellent question. It is going to require a little bit of nuance, in my opinion.
Sure.
So let's approach it like this. How would you go about selling this as a value, right? So we're going to have to make a play for someone's time to be spent altering the way they do their work to do it better. Sounds a little like Agile, right? We have this constant iterative pace. We take a moment to stop our work, to review it in a retrospective, and from that, form a couple of experiments. Keyword there being experiments. And this is one of the ways I would typically pitch trying it. If you notice, hey guys, I was working on this feature and it was just mind-bogglingly complex. I wonder if we could make it better the next time we have to write one of these, like just next sprint. Let's write all of our test cases in English first. What do you mean write it in English first? Oh, well, let's try this new syntax I heard about on a radio show called Cucumber and walk them through that and offer it as like, hey, I think this could help our productivity because, and if you can connect that strongly, you'll be able to do a lot of work. For my part, I've found that the Cucumber syntax in particular is really great at one particular optimization. And that is the optimization for the wet RAM. That is the RAM available up in the head, because it does a beautiful job of stripping away all of the unnecessary complexity of how's this all getting orchestrated at what particular time in the render cycle. No, it's just like, hey, when that dialog is already open and the user clicks this button with this option selected, then I'm going to do that. Simplicity itself.
And what I like about that is it completely takes away from any technical implementation as well, which as developers and technology folk, we love to get there as quickly as we can.
And being able to slow ourselves down just enough to answer the question of, can I communicate it in the language we all already speak at the same level, more or less, allows me to unlock a lot of value out of every member of the team, including the product owner or the scrum master in some cases. Because you have to remember, all of code ends up getting predicated on our ability to translate a model of reality into the instructions to a computer. Fuzzy thinking about that model of reality leads to fuzzier instructions to the computer, which leads to bugs.
Yep.
And so if you can get clear on your thinking, you can get better code, but you have to make the case for people because not everyone's going to see it. That's okay.
No, it's a good argument. I like the trail of thought which took you there. It would be interesting. It's a shame this one isn't a live stream, I guess, because I'm sure there'd be so many people bringing in opinions into this one. It's a really fascinating topic.
Well, I mean, if you'd like, I'd be happy to come back and we could do a live stream, like redux of this at some point.
Oh, I'm sure we could. Yeah, that'd be awesome. But no, really interesting. Please continue. Sorry.
No, that's perfect. So with that concept that the goal of code is to translate our model up here of reality and how it interacts and behaves into the actual behavior of a computer through the instructions, we need to be real dang careful about how much we're carrying of that model at a given moment in our head. So quick little statistics for you. Most people can carry about 5 distinct facts in their head at a given moment, give or take 2. In programming terms, that could be essentially the context of the class you're in, maybe the whole call chain of like why you're in this class at the moment, and then anything, variable names, branches, blah, inside the method you're in. This is what I'm talking about when I talk wet RAM. You've got at most 7 slots, but on average you're going to have 3.
And that's before we even talk about. I was going to jump in and say that's before we even talk about the cognitive load of all the other things that you've got spinning plates going on.
Right. And so you have to be incredibly diligent and careful about how much you allow anyone or require anyone to keep in mind in order to be able to do the job effectively. Now, there are straight up going to be areas of like the high level programming where we're dealing with reflection or idiomatic language syntax or expression trees that are just hard. And they require you to have that level of detail. Okay. But those problems, frankly, are very few and far between. In my 10 years, I have encountered 1 instance where I actually needed to do that work. 1. All the other times, I can now officially state I did that because I wanted to, not because it was in the best interest of the business I was serving. Thankfully, my senior developers at the time told me I was making it too complicated and ripped it out for me. But you have to be aware of when you're pulling yourself too far ahead because, oh, well, what about? No, come back down to earth. Do you need it? And thinking in cognitive burden. One of the ways we can most easily relieve that, as another little experiment you could propose to your team, we often call it exit early. Right? So, hey, I'm going to do a quick evaluation to determine if I need to do anything else. And we usually look at it as a performance optimization or some optimization for the compiler. I'll call you back. You're not writing code for the compiler. It ignores all of that because for it, it's evaluate, jump. That's all it cares about. But when you're looking at it as a human, as a cognitive load, as part of what I'd have to carry in wet RAM, is, hey, I did all of this evaluation for a ginormous Boolean. It might be even 3 multiple statements of if this and this, but not that. I have to carry all 3 of those until you call the if. And I don't know if it's important until you get there, but I'm assuming it's important since you calculated it. The earliest moment you can make use of the calculation and chunk the rest of my work, the better for me. Because now either I get my answer of, oh, wait, I need to exit this function call while I'm debugging because it's not going to happen. Or I can now dump all of that context and focus on the rest of the method because I don't care what causes you to exit. I need to modify how you compute. Okay, I can dump every one of those 4 or 5 lines above it.
And this is something that actually Golang, I think, do really well. So for anyone who is listening in and hasn't really played with Golang at all, it's not even really part of the language necessarily, but it's just kind of indoctrinated in the way that they write all of their demos, all of their samples, and just the way that people who write Go just write for simplicity first. So that idea of exiting early, one thing that really threw me at the beginning, and it's exactly that concept because we're just not used to seeing it that way, is they were inverting all of their if statements. So they could, get the error, errors happen, so we need to fail out of the program or fail out of the call or whatever. Fail early, off we go. You don't need to worry about any of the rest of that stuff now. We're just not used to seeing it that way. And it did take me kind of a few minutes just reading it going, that's strange. Why are they reading it that way? But then there's another side benefit to that as well. How many times have we seen that code base where it goes, if this, oh, and then we're going to enter to another level, then if this, oh, and then another level, and then you're slowly needing like your 48-inch monitor because it's so wide.
Yep.
When actually, you know what? If you follow that procedure you mentioned in terms of exit early, throw that error early, and this is why I bring the Go example in. What Go typically aim to try and do with their code base is have just a single kind of line of code rather than tons of indentation. Yes, indentation is going to be needed at points, fair enough. But if you can minimize that and again reduce some of that load and just make it a really simple linear path to follow, it makes it really readable as well. In a different sense from what we've been talking about. But
right. And that's more on the mechanical readable, but it is 100% a thing that's of value. Consider in C#, right? What's the default level of protection on everything you declare in a class?
Yeah,
it's private.
I know where we're going. Yep.
Right. So why do we call it private all the time? That's at least 6 more characters, almost a couple of indents in of everything before I get valuable information added. Every single line. It's insane. Now, I get it. For those who aren't as comfortable with it, eliminating private may be, wait, hold on, what is this? Because it's not part of the natural reading of the language. It's still part of your contextual burden. I get it. But the further you get, the more you have to optimize for, am I adding information or just data?
And I guess the challenge with something like that one, just to maybe throw the counterpoint in at some point here, is thinking back to that newer developer, for example. If they are a new developer and they just see accounts to your example earlier, and it's object, the object is account as well, let's say. Do they necessarily know the difference between private and public? Do they know in the language that private is the default? And are there potentially some consequences of that, changing that behavior or not understanding why that's there? So again, it's the why behind it that is important there.
Exactly. Now, building on that, one of the ways I've seen that come out, and like, okay, cool. So let's operate on a compromise. Let's leave that in our mainline classes, anything that's necessary for running the program. But there's no reason we should waste the extra characters during a test class, because that's going to declare a bunch of private stuff, especially if you're trying to favor like a given when then style. Just eliminate it. Now, when you read it, instead of reading private given this thing, you're just reading given this thing, and then you actually read the implementation. Instead of reading private, list of test objects, I'm just reading list of test objects as one of the things it needs. You don't care that it's private. No one else is calling that class. And so you can optimize for portions of readability in different areas of the code base based upon what the team kind of makes the call on. Hey, we really ought to protect ourselves like this.
And this is where standards are so important, and having something that can help you make sure you're adhering to those standards as well.
Yep.
And each team will be different.
Yeah, exactly. And heck, even within the same code bases, teams might make different calls. It's okay. One of the benefits there is that it will encourage you to ask questions. This is going back to that kind of experimental concept. I strongly encourage, especially if you've got 3 teams on a single code base, run experiments. Don't make the standards apply completely ironclad to everyone. Certain standards have to. Things like, hey, we're going to name all of our interfaces I something, so when you look at it, it's an interface. There are reasons we have certain of those, because they ensure that we can all make use of the code in a similar way. But within the code, there's a value for, in a limited scope, trying an experiment. As long as those teams are able to talk with one another about the experiments they're running, the rationale for them, and most importantly, the results. Because if you don't measure it, you have no idea if you made any impact. And one of the impacts you should check for is, hey, what did that do for our interoperability with the other teams? Can they read our code better now? No. Oh, well, maybe we shouldn't do that.
And this is, I was waiting for the right point to bring this thing actually, but inner sourcing is something that is really front and center for me at the minute. It's something I see kind of coming up time and time again. Yeah. And this theme of code being read is so important to that, because if you're team A and I'm team B, and I need to go and make some changes to the way team A goes and does their foobar application, whatever it is, right? And I need to be able to make that change so I can add on and integrate with you. If I can't read that, if I can't even make heads or tails of that, how on earth am I supposed to make a contribution to that before I can even get the tooling set up and my environment set up and everything else? Level 1 is just, can I even understand what I need to do to make that successful? And yes, I could call you, we could get on a Zoom call or a Teams call or whatever and have a chat, but it's not about that, is it? I shouldn't have to do that, is the point.
Yes, exactly. And there are so many different little nuances to being able to do that well, because especially if you consider inner source, there's every possibility that the reason that library got inner sourced is because the problem domain is incredibly complex and only 2 or 3 guys in the entire company know how to handle it. Making that readable is intensely difficult, because those guys will likely share enough context that between them, they all understand what it means or what it's supposed to mean. So, best option, pull in the junior. Ask them to explain what they think it does. And if they don't explain it like you think it ought to be explained, tweak your language. But you can kind of leverage this, but you have to be willing to ask the question, because, as you pointed out, code readability is part of the service arrangement for an inner source library. Can it be supported? Can you read it? Because if you can't do the fundamental activity, which is change.
There's almost a very subtle underlying theme that I think we haven't mentioned actually throughout all of this, which is having that need of psychological safety within a team as well to be able to do that. Because if I feel like it's, whoa, hold on, someone's now attacking me for the quality of my code, am I going to carry on making contributions, or am I going to feel like I'm doing the right thing for the team? So it's about establishing, going about things in the right way.
Right. So if you're willing, I'd like to take that instance you had asked about how would you suggest making this kind of an evolutionary change rather than a revolutionary change. I think this and the psychological safety kind of go hand in hand. Let's assume we start with a team that's got so-so psychological safety. They're still trying to get used to each other. They're relatively new, and they've been handed a really hard problem with a high deadline. Under that circumstance, it is intensely tempting to everyone to themselves, well, it's not my fault that the junior couldn't keep up, and let, essentially shit roll downhill, pardon my French. You can take the alternative. Don't go after that. It's going to cost you a personal bit of integrity of, no, we need to draw the line here. But having one person willing to stick their neck out just an inch can make it safer for the team to try and follow that too. And it doesn't have to be the team lead, though it's important that the team lead at least make the attempt. But if you have someone with a high degree of personal influence on the team, someone whose integrity the team trusts, who's constantly there trying to mentor and help the team, their call to let's make the code more readable will bear a lot of weight. How they conduct themselves during, say, a pull request review, suggesting, hey, we could make this more readable if, or hey, have you considered writing your tests like, makes a big difference. Now, I'm a consultant, so I constantly am shifting through teams and jumping into environments where I get to take luck of the draw on what the culture is there when I land. One of the first places I always start is with the tests. First, standard practice, almost everyone knows to a degree or another, we ought to be writing tests, test-driven development, all that. Not all of us are very good at it, and I get it. Test-driven development isn't even something I practice all the time, but it is something I keep in mind. It is hard to test, do the thing, test, do the thing. And unless you have your setup done really, really well for it, the practice comes difficult. But keeping your tests there, making certain you have them written and that they're readable, that's very much more approachable for everybody. So I usually start there. But the way I keep people convinced to try it is I'll sit there with them and do the code with them. I'll show them an example of refactoring their tests into a given when then style. Showing them, hey, what do you think about? Not saying, do it this way, but offering it as a thing to try. Hey, what do you think of? I've done this. I've found it works really well for me. Can I show you? And making it an invitation rather than a demand or an instruction is a great way to start that first step. And as you get better, people are going to need help. So anticipate that as you do this, your ability to affect the change evolutionarily in your org is going to depend upon your personal influence and your ability to inspire and instruct others.
And there's that element of coaching in there as well, because again, you're not doing the thou shalt go and do this, you're giving them that suggestion. It then gives them that time to kind of mull it over, noodle on it, and think, oh, this is a good idea. And it almost makes it then, hey, this is my idea, because I think this is a good idea now. And,
exactly. Yeah. And you need to give them that time just enough to buy into, hey, hold on, this actually works. This isn't, snake oil salesman. This is actually something that made a difference in my code. What I've found is that there's that uncomfortable transition period where they're not entirely convinced, but they need someone to keep them in the habit just long enough for them to get the facility with writing it like that makes it work. I found that about 4 or 5 practice attempts on writing your code in a given when then style in the tests is what it takes to kind of get over the hump. So the first 2 times they're like, oh my gosh, what is this? The third attempt, they're like, hold on, can you help me figure out what the given for this is? Because they got like the given and the when swapped or something. The 4th attempt, they're mostly good on their own. And the 5th one is when they finally start seeing, hold on, that wasn't so hard this time. And it was easy for me to add a new test or something along those lines. But there's that fine balance between keep their feet to the coals just long enough for them to start seeing the value, but not too long. Because the more draconian you are, the more pushback you're going to get.
No, with you. Man, I could keep talking about this, but I'm very conscious of our time as well. So I'm going to probably move us on to maybe kind of wrapping us up and also talk about one other thing as well, because I know, or I happen to know at least, that you, as well as all of the great presentations you're doing, the consulting work, etc., you've also written a book.
That's true. So one of the reasons why I'm on talks like this is because I've learned how to do a thing well. But if it just stays in my head, no one but me and maybe the people immediately next to me get the benefit from it. And I struggled enough trying to figure it out. I don't want that to have to be somebody else's story. So as part of trying to figure out how do I share this in an effective manner, I did write up some books. Now, the book in question is called 10 Days to Become a Better Developer. It is a series of 10 30-minute exercises you can take over the course of a sprint, about 2 weeks, to intentionally improve your practice as a developer. And it's not just going to be things like, hey, go do a code kata. There's a time and place for those. But since I know that's the common, like, well, go do this. Yes, you need to practice that way. I chose to focus on the ways of working type help. Things like, hey, how are you managing your time? Do you know how long it's going to take you to do this task? Do you have a good feel for how much your time is being spent? Do you have a good interaction with your team? Are you taking time to intentionally curate the things you want to learn rather than the things you have to learn? And focusing on those practices, all you have to do really is provide the questions. Hey, have you tried? Consider this. And people can make great leaps of progress if they could just get someone to collect the questions for them. And since I know it can be difficult to find mentors, especially with what happened in COVID and everyone went into the four corners, I wanted to offer this as a thing that might make it easier. So, Chris, I actually sent you the link for this, and I'd ask if you'd be so kind to share it with your audience. I wanted to offer that at a discount for the group for anyone who thinks that sounds interesting. Give it a try. Heck, if you guys have feedback, I'd love to hear it. Shoot me an email at daniel@scheufler.io. I want to hear it. I want to try and make this actually a useful tool because sure, I could make it a money grab, but why? When the goal of it is to make something better, namely you at development. So how far do you think you could make it in 10 days?
There we go. So the gauntlet has been laid down there, folks. Of course, you can see Daniel's email on screen there as well, next to his name. I'll make sure it's in the show notes and in the description as well. But Daniel, I know we could have probably kept on talking and talking and talking. I'm going to have to wrap us up somewhere, but no doubt I'm sure we'll have to have another discussion on all of this because
I look forward to it.
Super insightful things, but really great discussion. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your amazing knowledge there. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Chris. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. So there we go. We have been talking all about how code is read. And I wish I could summarize that in 30 seconds. I think there's so many different tacits of information here that we could go and take. You know what to do. Go ahead, take a look at that link in the show notes. And then, of course, we'll have a chat with Daniel and see if we can get maybe a more interactive live stream type of session going there as well. But if you liked it, please hit the like button, please subscribe. And of course, we'll be back again very soon in the future to talk about some other themes. So do keep a watch. But until then, thanks for tuning in, folks. Bye for now.